Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Turkey Calling 101 webinar. Just a few things to run over before we get started. If at any time you have any issues with audio or video, just feel free to drop that in the chat and let us know that you're having issues and maybe you can't hear us. Your microphones and webcams are disabled for the entirety of the webinar, just to reduce distractions and things like that. So if you do have any questions, there is a question and answer feature of this webinar. You can see it kind of listed here as Q&A. If you drop a question in that, one of the panelists can either address that question live during the webinar, or you can also kind of type an answer if it doesn't happen to fit within that exact discussion at that moment. If we don't get to your question during the webinar, we will have a few minutes at the end for other questions and answers. So you can always kind of reiterate that question at that point. We'll try to get to it as quick as we can. There is also a chat window that you can utilize if again you're having issues with audio or video. Just let us know and we'll try to get that sorted out as quickly as possible. We will be sending out an email in the next, probably sometime tomorrow, with a full recording of this webinar. So if you have to leave early for another reason or you're having technical issues, you can expect to get a recording of the webinar tomorrow, as well as a few other handouts that we think you may find informative. But with that, today we're going to obviously discuss turkey calling. Turkey calling is one of the more important aspects of turkey hunting, and arguably one of I think the more fun aspects of turkey hunting. It's really cool to be able to communicate with these birds, and you know, what I like to describe it as turkey calling is more of an art than it is a science. So we'll go over kind of the basic turkey vocalizations that you're likely to hear in the wild, but also the vocalizations that as a hunter, it's important to be able to recreate. After we go over those vocalizations, we'll dive into the different turkey calling types, and then we'll have a few demonstrations by some of our panelists as they'll show you how to use some of the calls and how to reproduce some of these vocalizations, and also kind of when to use them in your hunting scenario. We'll also go over locator calling a little bit, and then we'll kind of end with kind of a strategic approach to hunting near a roost. And so we'll go over kind of a quick scenario of trying to locate roosted toms, how to set up in an area where you expect them to fly down, and then go over some of the different vocalizations and calling strategies that we utilize while we're out in the field. And then at the end, we do have some additional tips that we think are important to bring up in regards to turkey calling. So with that, we'll kind of introduce our panelists for tonight. My name is Dan Stevens. Up next, we have Adam. Adam, if you'd like to say hello.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining us today, and hopefully you guys learned something here.
Thank you, Adam. And up next, we have Curtis Twellman.
Good evening, everybody.
Perfect. So these will be our panelists as we kind of progress through the conversation today. Again, so if you have any questions at any time, feel free to utilize the question and answer session, and we'll try to get those as quickly as possible. But we'll go ahead and just jump right in and start off, again, going over some of these basic turkey vocalizations that you're likely to hear in the wild, and also that you as a hunter are trying to recreate and reproduce. So we'll first start off with the gobble. I will give a quick headphone warning. There will be some audio playing in a few seconds, so if you're using headphones, you may want to turn your volume down just to protect your ears. So we'll give you a few seconds for that. Okay, so here's the gobble call. And so the gobble is kind of this loud, rapid gurgling sound that's basically made by the male turkeys. It's primarily used in the spring, and it's to let hens know that he's in the area. And that's one of the real interesting things about turkey hunting, is that we're essentially trying to reverse their standard ecological and breeding behavior. So in the wild, a male turkey is trying to bring the hens to him. And so he's going to be out there gobbling and kind of strutting his stuff and you know, just being very vocal and show that he's the mature bird in the area. But as hunters, we're trying to kind of reverse that course, and we're trying to act like the hens and bring that tom to us. And so you'll notice that as we kind of move through this conversation tonight, that we're kind of trying to reverse nature, so to speak. Now, I will give some caution. Especially if you're hunting public land, you want to use the gobble in kind of a minimal aspect because it has this natural tendency to just draw other hunters to your position. Because again, as turkey hunters during the spring, that's the one vocalization that we're always listening for. We're always trying to figure out where that next tom is. And so oftentimes if you're out there utilizing a gobble call, oftentimes it's just going to bring other hunters kind of to your area as they're looking for that bird. So for my personal preference, I kind of use it as a last resort when I'm hunting. I will occasionally use it in locator sequences, as we'll get to in a little bit later. But that essentially means you can use it to roost birds late in the evening and try to get them to gobble off the roost so that you have a predefined location of where you expect them to be in the morning. So a gobble call is not something that most hunters utilize very often, but again, it's a sound that we're listening to very heavily in the spring. And gobbles have this unique propensity to really sound like they're coming from a different area. It's that kind of guttural deep sound that really seems to reverberate and hit off of hillsides and ridges and mountains, and it can really impact how that sound reaches you, and it makes you think that maybe a bird is 100 yards to your right, when in reality it's all the way to your left, and that sound is just kind of bouncing around. But it is, again, a very cool sound, not something that a lot of us try to reproduce in the field, but it's something you're going to be listening for very heavily in the spring. Now, the next call is going to be the Yelp. So the Yelp is kind of the basic turkey sound that's kind of often delivered in a series of these kind of single note vocalizations. It's arguably the kind of most basic turkey vocalization, but it's also one of those that's most utilized by hunters. And I kind of mentioned this right at the beginning, that I said it's the series of single note vocalizations. And I'm gonna play the recording again, but I want you to focus on the cadence and the rhythm of the call as opposed to the tonality and the pitch of it. So really focus on that cadence and that rhythm of the Yelp. So you can see how it kind of starts out in this, kind of slow and longer note, and as it progresses through the kind of 7 to 9 notes is fairly typical in a Yelp sequence. As it gets progressively closer to the end, it starts to speed up. And when I first started turkey hunting, I really focused on trying to get the tonality and the pitch to be as what I assumed was as perfect as it could be. But what I have found to be more important than the individual pitch and the tonality of your call is adhering to that cadence, right? So every turkey sounds different in the woods. Some of them will be a little bit more raspy. Some will be a little bit more high pitched. Some of them, just have distinct tone changes. But what's always kind of steadfast is that cadence, and that cadence is very important to a basic Yelp sequence. The next vocalization that we're going to cover is the cluck. So the cluck is kind of this vocalization that consists of these one or more kind of short staccato notes. I typically prefer to use clucks in kind of a pair. So I'll either do a 1 cluck sequence or kind of a 3 cluck sequence. But it's usually used just to get the attention of another bird. I apologize for the typo, turkeys usually click, but they usually cluck to get the attention of another bird. And it's a good call to kind of reassure an approaching gobbler that a hen is kind of still waiting for him. So as we kind of progress through this conversation tonight, you'll pick up on the concept of toms hanging up. That's a very common occurrence in the spring, is that for some reason they're just not willing to commit to that last 60 or 70 yards of distance that they need to close to be inside of your effective range. And oftentimes clucking is a really good way to just continue to communicate with that bird and just continue to reassure him that there actually is a hen over here and he needs to come investigate. Now the cluck works really well on its own, but it's also heavily used with purr. And that'll be a vocalization that we get to in a few seconds, but clucking and purring in tandem is one of these really calming vocalizations that doesn't have a ton of energy behind it. And it's just the natural sounds that birds are doing while they're out feeding and just kind of rummaging around. And so it's, again, a great call to just slowly keep building the confidence of that tom as he's coming in. Because if he's coming in and he's 80 yards away and you let off a really loud yelp sequence, chances are you're going to scare that bird off. And so oftentimes just doing some of these more quiet vocalizations can really pay off in dividends. Up next is the Kiki Call. So you can see that this Kiki Call is a very high-pitched vocalization that doesn't really sound like many of the other turkey vocalizations that we've covered thus far. And typically it's because it's being produced by immature turkeys. And so the Kiki Call isn't something that's used very heavily in the spring. It can be very effective in the fall. And what this vocalization does is it essentially is an I'm lost call. It's kind of an assembly call. And so in the fall, when they're in these big kind of wintering flocks, one of the primary hunting strategies for fall turkey hunting is going in and kind of breaking up this larger flock in the hopes that they start to eventually come together. And very often you can use that Kiki vocalization to sit there and call and try to reconvene the flock towards you. And so that's kind of primarily how this vocalization is used in the fall. You can use it in the spring, but I personally don't use it just because, again, it's not a vocalization that's very often produced during the spring by wild birds. And I try to sound as realistic as possible. Now, the Kiki Call is also a very prominent call utilized by fur bear hunting, or fur bear hunters. Coyote and bobcat hunters, we use a Kiki Call quite a bit. Again, just to sound like a distressed animal. But again, for spring turkey hunting, it's important to kind of keep it in the back pocket, but it's something that I certainly don't use. I may use it, 1 out of every 4 or 5 turkey seasons in the spring, personally. Up next is the Purr. And so you can hear how soft and kind of relaxing that sound is. And this vocalization is one of those that can really charge up a tom and really make him decide to commit and come that last little bit of distance. I kind of mentioned it a little bit with the Cluck, but this goes really well in tandem with the Cluck. So very commonly you'll do 1 or 3 Clucks followed up by this little short rolling purr sequence. And again, it's just used to, again, add a little bit more realism to the stage, but also just keep that turkey engaged as he's approaching your setup. Because the more you spend out during the spring turkey season, you'll start to pick up that wild turkeys are not silent. They are one of the more vocal species that we have, and they are constantly clucking and purring and chatting. And so if you're in a setup and you have, your decoys set up and this tom's approaching and it's just very quiet and very silent, that can cause the tom to have some reservations and maybe not commit that last little bit to get inside of your effective range. So purring is one of these that I use constantly once I already have a bird kind of committed to my setup and I'm just trying to keep enticing him and keep bringing him in a little bit closer. It's a call that doesn't carry a long distance. Again, it's kind of the soft rolling call, so it really doesn't travel very far. So again, it's not something I'm using if the bird's 200 to 300 yards away. It's more when they're inside of 100, and I'm just going to continue to reassure and bring them in that last little bit. The next vocalization we're going to discuss is the cut. And so you kind of heard it in that recording. The cut is one of those that if I need to get a tom to gobble for whatever reason, whether it's still in the roost and I'm trying to locate him, or I just maybe lost sight of him and I'm trying to figure out which way he's going to approach me from, the cut is one of these high kind of loud, fast, energetic calls that really gets a tom to fire off a gobble. So a cut can be really effective at that. If you're sitting there and maybe the tom went silent on you, which happens quite a bit. If you're just sitting there purring and maybe doing some soft yelps and he just goes silent on you, utilizing some of these real fast, loud, kind of erratic single cuts can oftentimes cause him to just instantly gobble, just kind of like you heard in this recording. And so it's a really good call for that. But the cut is kind of this, it's a sign that turkeys are excited, not necessarily that they're alarmed. It's not an alarm call. It's just kind of an animated and excited call. And so that's why it kind of causes that tom to just instantly fire off his gobble right when that vocalization hits. If it kind of has several uses in hunting. I kind of highlighted one, but if a gobbler is henned up, and essentially what that means is a tom is already with a hen. It is very, very, very hard to convince a live tom to leave a live hen and come to your plastic hens that may be set up 100 yards away. And so that's kind of what, when we use the term henned up, that's essentially what it means. But you can cut back to that hen and try to bring the hen to you. And so that's one of the really important strategies as you progress throughout the spring turkey season. You know, the first week, they may not be, you know, henned up yet. They still might be kind of actively searching and they're not as kind of locked down. But as that season progresses, more and more of these toms are going to be with hens already. And so the cut is a very good call to try to convince the hen to come your way. And hopefully she's going to bring that tom that's with her in your direction as well. And so that's another really important aspect of turkey hunting is it's not, again, always focused on trying to bring that tom to you. It may be trying to bring on the hen that tom is actively with. And again, the cuts are just kind of these high energy, a bit more excited. It kind of adds a little bit of urgency to the scenario that you're trying to portray in your decoys. And oftentimes that's enough to convince that hen or that tom to close the distance and hopefully come within your effective range. I saw we had a question from Nate. We will get to that in just a few slides. We actually have a pretty long slide on diaphragm calls, and we will get to that in just a second. But the last kind of basic vocalization I want to bring up is the fly down or fly up cackle. And I'm going to play that recording one more time. And in addition to the vocalization of the turkey, I also want you to listen to some of the background noises that you're hearing, because that's a very important aspect of the fly down or fly up cackle. So listen to what other sounds you're hearing in the background. And so what you're hearing is the wing beats of birds as they're going up to a roost or coming down off the roost. And that's something if you try to reproduce this fly down or fly up cackle, adding that little bit of noise that sounds like the turkey's flying adds so much to your calling scenario. I like to describe turkeys as kind of, when they're flying off the roost, they're almost like a 747 trying to fly through the woods. They have an incredibly large wingspan. They're a huge bird, 20 to 25 pounds, and they are not the most graceful flyers in the world. And so when they're flying off a roost or flying up to the roost, they're running into trees, they're running into branches, their wings are hitting brush, and that's what's making that sound. And so if you're utilizing this kind of fly up or fly down cackle, creating those sounds can be a real important aspect of your calling scenario. Some people will use baseball caps and just kind of, as you're calling, just kind of smack it against your leg or against the ground as you're doing that fly down or fly up cackle. Some people will also use little fans, or even some people use an old turkey wing that maybe they harvested the year prior and they got it dried out nice. And you can use that to, again, make those sounds. But the fly down cackle is this real animated and, again, high energy vocalization, similar to the cut, but it's going to consist of a longer note sequence. So typically it's about 3 to 10, and the notes are irregularly spaced. Like I mentioned during the Yelp, it's really important to follow that traditional cadence. With the fly down cackle or fly up cackle, they're kind of irregularly spaced, and so you don't have to focus so much on that cadence. And you will kind of increase in pitch as that call nears its end. But there's kind of two main instances where you could use a fly down cackle or fly up. And obviously that's if you're trying to imitate birds flying up or imitate birds flying down. If you're trying to imitate birds flying up, you're really only going to do that in the evening as you're trying to locate roosts. You can use the fly up cackle to kind of simulate that. But again, you're only going to use it kind of in the weaning minutes of the day, so right at sunrise or shortly thereafter, as the birds are kind of naturally going up to their roost. And it can help you kind of locate roosts that way. I typically will use kind of a fly down cackle. So in the morning, you're trying to imitate birds coming off the roost. You need to be a little bit cautious about using it early in the morning, in the sense that if you're mimicking and trying to create the illusion that there's a separate hen, in your direction that's flying down and is leaving the roost. If that tom is still in his roost tree, that may be enough to convince him to sit in that roost tree a little bit longer. And the reason for that is obviously now he knows there's another hen in the area and he wants to try to get a good view of him or of her. And so he's going to just sit there and keep gobbling and hoping that, again, he's bringing that hen to him. Because again, in nature, the tom is doing, most of the calling and most of the vocalizations and is trying to bring the hen to them. And so if he happens to hear a hen leave the roost and he's still up in his tree, he may sit there and sit there and sit there and just constantly gobble and gobble and gobble and try to bring that hen his way. So if you do use a fly down cackle, I recommend trying to use it after you're certain that the toms are on the ground. Now it is a really good call to use it. In my opinion, it's overused a little bit. If you watch some of the hunting videos and things you see on Outdoor Channel or YouTube, a lot of people use the fly down cackle pretty much every single morning. I don't like to do that. I typically use it more strategically. So if I have a tom that maybe I've been hunting for 2 or 3 days and I just cannot get him to come down off the roost in my direction, maybe I'll try it then. But again, it's a really good call if it's used correctly. So just make sure that tom is on the ground, and also don't be the first turkey to leave the roost. This kind of goes with all of these vocalizations, and we'll get into it as we progress through some of the calling demonstrations and scenarios. I do not want to be the first turkey in the woods talking. I'm going to wait till other live real birds start communicating and start talking before I start my calling. If you're the first one, they might start to pick up on that, because a tom chooses his roosting site and his roosting location very strategically. And he's often choosing that site because he knows there's a hen roost nearby and it gives him a vantage point over that hen roost. And so if you're out there calling and calling and calling, well, he's kind of already like, okay, well, I haven't heard them come down from the roost. They haven't talked yet, but now there's a random bird walking around on the ground. And so I always try to be not necessarily that first bird that's talking during the day. So now we'll get into a little bit of turkey calling. So I'll turn it over to Curtis, and he's going to dive into some of the different call types and go over some turkey calling scenarios and how to use some of these different calls. So take it away, Curtis.
All right. Thanks, Dan. So a lot of different turkey calls on the market. A lot of these have not hit the store shelves yet. So if you go out looking, you might be sad to find the options are pretty limited at the moment, but those are going to be stocked up here before too long. And of course, you can always order from the good old internet, but we can break the types of calls really into these basic types. And you could put locator on here too, even though it's not generally made to sound like a turkey. Most folks are going to use it as a turkey call. But anyway, here in number 1, diaphragm call or a mouth call. That's going to be your best friend when that bird gets in really close. This is probably, well, not probably, it is the toughest call to really master and to get good at. But once you get good at it, it's a great tool for the arsenal, because when that bird's in close, turkeys have great vision, and they can pick movement out right now. So having a call that you can use hands-free in the diaphragm call is awesome. And especially, like Dan said, just to give some of those little confidence calls when the bird's getting in close, mouth call's great for that. Now, number 2, box. This is like the legacy call when you think of the old school turkey hunter. He or she is playing on a really finely tuned instrument box call. So these are great in terms of ease of use. These are really easy. But they do generate quite a bit of movement. So that's one disadvantage. When that bird gets in close, they sound great. They're easy to use. You're not going to make too many, mistakes on a box call, but you got that movement. So a great tool for the bag. Again, it's got its place, but probably the sweetest sounding call on the whole board here. Now, number 3, called many different names. You could hear it called a pot call, a friction call, slate call. All these are correct. Basically, these calls consist of a pot and a striker. And I'm gonna pull a couple of these out here in a second and show you. So you'll get to see them firsthand here. But your striker looks like a pencil, a stylus type thing. Those are always made out of hardwood or some really hard carbon or polycarbonate, something hard to cause friction when it hits the other hard surface that's on the pot. And so that one there in the picture, that's a slate call. That's the tried and true. And in terms of sounding sweet, you really just can't beat slate. But you've got choices, aluminum pot calls. You've got different crystals. They've all got their place. I've got a few examples that we'll pull out here. But when I'm really wanting to sound like a turkey, slate is my go-to. Nothing wrong with slate. It's nice to have some of those other options for specialty scenarios, and they sound a little bit different. But slate is awesome. And in terms of what the friction call or the pot call is really good at, is you can make every sound basically that a turkey can make with a friction call. So super versatile, good sound. And they do generate some movement, but it's a little bit less than the box call. And this number 4 here, this is a type of box call, but it's a push-pull call. So this is a specialty call, and this is great for folks who just can't get the diaphragm call down, because this gives you an option to call at birds without much movement at all. And they've even got these that you can strap to the end of your gun and just kind of use with one finger that you're from your hand that you're using to support your shotgun. So kind of a good mixed bag. The push-pull call, it's kind of got the ease of use of the box call and that real sweet sound, but you can get away with quite a bit less movement using that one, especially if you can mount it to your gun or your knee or something like that. And really helps when that bird gets in close. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get right into these slate calls, and I'm going to turn on my right camera. Looky here, we got 2 cameras for you all today. We're getting all technical like Bill Gates and Elon Musk here. So, okay, so from this angle, this is going to make it really, really great to see these different pot calls I've got here. And before I get into making these noises, the first thing I want to talk about is just your basic maintenance. And a piece of sandpaper or a Brillo pad or something of that nature is going to be your best friend. So you got to have something abrasive to put a new finish on your pot call. And especially when you buy them new, if you buy one of these crystal calls, remember, these calls work by friction. So when you buy them and they're brand new and shiny, you know, some people are sitting there rubbing on it and you're like, yeah, it's broken, it's not making any noise. Well, there's no chance to make friction, so you've got to put you've got to resurface that in a little bit of sandpaper. This here is 220, which a fine grit is best for things like crystal and aluminum, which I've got actually on the back of this call. And then a more coarse grit, even all the way down to like 60 or 80, can work on slate, but 220 works on slate too. Now, when you're putting a surface on here, what you want to do is always go the same way. So you do not want to sand this thing in circular motions, because that's how you're going to be trying to make sounds. You want something that your striker is going to be able to find purchase against, so you can make these friction calls. So always sand one way. And if the call's nice like this and it's got a picture, so I can always just tell to put that turkey face up, I'm going to sand right across him, and just in straight lines all the way across. Use a Kleenex or a lens cloth to wipe that off. You never want to touch the surface of any of these calls with your hands. We have oils on our hands. That's gonna mess up your surface. So straight lines, and that's on everything, whether it's crystal like these or aluminum. Again, I've already got a surface on this, so I'm gonna match it. I see it going this way, so sand it that way. And the same thing with aluminum. Just putting that straight surface on them, brushing off the dust with a Kleenex. And you can do the same thing with your striker. You can sand these down. Even I've got a carbon one here too, works better in the rain. But you can sand these down if you're not getting the right call, and let your ear tell you. So if you're using your call, it sounds great. After a little bit of use, it doesn't sound so great. That's your ear telling you that you need to put a new surface on your pot call. So now we've got them, we're ready to go. We've got a surface on here. I guess I'll also talk about the different options that you'll see in the store when you go to purchase a pot call. So crystal takes some sanding to make it work. These calls are really, really loud. So if it's windy, if it's rainy, as it has been known to be in Illinois in the spring, these calls are going to get you a little bit more distance. That bird's going to be able to hear you a little bit further away than both slate and aluminum generally. But that being said, slate is the most friction is on slate, so it's the easiest to use. I like to stick with that, but this is also the first side that if it gets wet at all, yeah, it's hard to make a noise. So aluminum is a lot like slate, but to me it's a little quieter. It's a little more mellow of a tone. You know, so all of these calls will work. You definitely don't need to have multiple ones, but if you do get a aluminum or slate call for your first one, maybe your second one, you'll want to get one of these crystal ones to give you a little bit greater reach on the windy days, and you might want to get a striker that's not wood that can help in wet weather. And all your different strikers are going to give you different sounds. Try one until you find one you like. Any hardwood works for that. So now we kind of know a little bit about the different pot calls that are out there. We know how to give them a finish. We know how to get our striker ready. Now we're going to get right into actually calling turkeys, and I'm going to go ahead and, just like I do in real life, I'm going to reach for my slate call first off, and this little handmade call here out of Osage orange, 2 sides. So we're going to start with the basic turkey vocalization, which is the yelp. So on this friction call, to make a yelp, we're going to make little ovals, and you're going to be able to see that here on this camera. And generally when I'm hunting, I hold this call in real tight to my body, but for here I'm gonna hold it out a little bit. Remember that the noise is actually coming from the back side of the call. these have holes, so some of it maybe comes out here, but especially when I'm starting out, I really tuck that call into my body and deaden it and make sure it's quiet. That's much better than starting out, real loud and potentially scaring a bird. So anyway, basic Yelp here. And you can experiment with making small little circles and big circles. So generally your big ovals are going to sound more raspy, more like a Jake or even a Gobbler Yelp. And then your tight little circles are going to sound more like a younger bird. So you can kind of experiment with that. Little circles. You can also experiment with where you hold your striker. So in general, the closer to the tip you hold your striker, the more high-pitched it's going to sound, and of course, vice versa. So we can do this same kind of thing. And just kind of hear how it makes some different sounds there. So, and again, on the aluminum side, the same thing. Always look which way your surface is. If you don't have a picture on there, like I don't have here, I look and I want to have the big part of my oval going against the surface I put in there. So. Now, another thing when you're using your friction call, your pot call out in the wilds, never take your striker off your pot call when you're actually calling at a bird. And that's for two reasons. For one, all of these calls have a sweet spot. And this is really evident when you go to the crystal calls, which are you have to put a surface on them to get anything. And once you find that sweet spot, you don't want to lose it, because the different spot is going to sound a little bit different, and it might not make the smooth sounds you've been used to making the past few minutes. But the real big reason you don't want to take it off is these are designed to amplify sound, and tapping these on here is it's not a natural sound. So that's going to be, that could alert in a bird that's coming in to your calling. So two reasons to never take your call off there. Once you find that sweet spot, you don't want to give it up. And again, I like the Slate calls better than the crystal as far as sounding like a bird. So that's our basic Yelp. Now let's get into a cluck or a putt. And now it's just more of an emphatic, really trying to get that bird's attention. And so now, instead of making these big ovals, we're just going to push. We're going to find our sweet spot on here, and we're just going to be pulling this striker back towards us with a real quick little motion. So no circles, no nothing. We're just finding our sweet spot. And then we can mix in the clucks and the yelps together to make it sound more like a live bird. So along with the clucks, a lot of times we want to add in that purr, and we can do that on a friction call too. So once I find my good spot here, I'll kind of get some yelps and mix in some purrs. And to do that, instead of just your quick pulling back to make the quick cluck, I'm going to slowly drag this across And it's going to make a sound that sounds like a purr, hopefully. So here we go. And we'll go ahead and give it a little try on the aluminum side and see what we get here. So yeah, not getting a great purr on that. That means I probably need to spend a little bit more time putting a better surface on the aluminum side. But also, like I mentioned earlier, the slate being, having the most friction of any of these surfaces, this is generally the easiest, and that's why I like to stick with that. And now I'll kind of try to use it to mix a little bit of clucks, yelps, and purrs like I might if I was really calling it a bird here. So okay, and that's the pot call. Real versatile little call. Different surfaces, different strikers. I like to carry multiples in my bag, but to tell you the truth, I almost always just go slate and my Osage Orange or hedge striker because it's what I like the best. I've got others that I can pull for, and sometimes if this just isn't quite working, it's weird. You grab a different striker, grab a different call, sounds a little bit different, and maybe the gobblers respond a little bit better. I don't know why it works that way, but if something's not working, don't be afraid to change it up and try it a little different way. So that's your slate call.
Hey,
Really,
Curtis, before we move on, we have a question about pot and slate calls. Do you mind discussing with the slate call how and when you transition to a shooting position without making noise?
yes. So I'm always in a shooting position when I'm turkey hunting personally. So I when I get down there, I'm on the ground, kind of sitting with my knees out in front of me and my shotgun resting on them. And then I'll have my slate call out in my lap, and my shotgun sitting on my knees. And so I'm kind of already in my shooting position, holding my slate call. I'm almost there. And when I'm calling the bird, he's calling back at me. That's great because I know exactly where he's at. But when he shuts up, I tend to get ready to shoot because I feel like he's either running at me full bore or, I might have to do something else. But if he's responding to me real good and then all of a sudden he's very quiet, then I will go ahead and put this down and make sure that I'm fully ready to shoot because I'm expecting that bird to pop out at any time. But so hopefully that answers your question. I try to be mostly in position so that if a turkey does surprise me, I can kind of, gently drop these in my lap and be ready to shoot without moving too much.
Excellent. And I'll give my input as well. It kind of comes back to what Curtis said earlier about transitioning from a slate or a box call to a diaphragm as that bird approaches. So once that bird is within about 100 yards, I typically will either not utilize my pot call or kind of put it down and really focus on the mouth call side of things. But something you'll see a lot in some of the newer calls is that they actually are built with a kind of leg strap. And so the way I turkey hunt is I'm sitting with my back against the tree with one knee up and my shotgun basically sitting directly on top of my knee. And having that call kind of strapped to my thigh gives me a really good hands-free. So all I really have to worry about is holding that kind of stylus and that striker in my hand, and I can easily set that down quietly and without making too much movement.
Yep, good question. All right, I think with that, we're about ready to move into the diaphragm call, huh? All right, I am going to switch cams here. Let's see if this works. Oops. All right, there we go. Now, diaphragm calls, like we mentioned, definitely have their place. Not as easy to use as some of the other call types that we're going to be talking about, but that hands-free option is really awesome when it comes to turkeys. They've got really great eyesight and definitely comes in handy. So let's talk about some of these different options you're going to see out there. You're going to see just a host of number, basically cutouts that you can get in these reeds. You know, they all are meant to make the call sound a little bit different, give it a little bit more rasp, a little bit more cut, you know, something to that nature. I've never found one that particularly, you know, screams out as being better or worse to me. My tactic is I go to the store, I generally buy 2 or 3, come home and play with them all and find the one that I like the best, that sounds the best to me, and then hope that the gobblers agree. So kind of my tactic there. But the one thing you want to remember with all these different reeds, and a lot of them are making where the longest reed is a different color, which is easy to pick it out. But the longest reed does go down. Some of them will have a tab in the call, which will make that easy to find. But yeah, when you brand new first buy your diaphragm call, it'll be completely flat. And so you may be wondering, well, which way do I put it in? Well, first off, the reed is going to be pointing out. So these are kind of made in a half circle, you know, half circle shape. You might think that it would go in this way to match the curvature of your mouth, but that's not right. You want the reeds pointing out, so the air you're blowing over the reeds and out your mouth. And then the longest reed, or usually the reed that is colored and not clear, is going to be the bottom reed. Put that down. And when you're buying calls for the first time, if you're not familiar with the mouth call, fewer reeds generally is going to be a little bit easier to call. You may not have quite the complexity and raspiness to the Yelp that some of these 3 reed calls with big cutouts get, but it's going to be a little bit easier to make the calls, which is the main thing. So that's going to be the first thing you want to do, is to be able to sound like a turkey. Then you can kind of move up and get into different reeds and try different things like that. But first thing, you got to be able to make all the sounds. You also, it's important to note that you can trim these calls. So if you put it in and it doesn't fit in your mouth right, as long as you're not cutting these reeds, you can trim this whole casing and make this call fit your mouth a little bit better. So feel free to do that. And then before I get into it, the last thing I'll talk about with the diaphragm or the mouth call is going to be storage. So these are not typically, they don't last a long time. These little thin latex reeds, they eventually will dry out. That's the main thing that you're trying to do, is to make sure that one, you want them to dry out after you use them, so there's no mold or bacteria growing in there. But you don't want them to dry out so much that they lose their flexibility. So it's kind of I generally get about 2 to 3 years out of a diaphragm call. But they never seem to sound as good as that first year. So I like to pick up 1 or 2 each year. So anyway, storage, take a little toothpick or something thin. It could be a paper clip. you know, as long as it's rubber coated, not going to mess up your reeds. A toothpick works real well. Get it in between those reeds, and that allows airflow to get in there and dry it out. And then they all come with these little protective cases. You can put it right back in its case and put this in your refrigerator, which will be just a little controlled environment, keep it fresh a little bit longer. So that's your storage. Now we'll get into actually making some noises with these. So just like with the friction call, we'll start out with the Yelp. Another thing I really like about mouth calls I'll mention too is you can practice them anywhere since they're hands-free. So if you've got a commute to work, you know, throw that in your car, throw it in your pocket. You can call all through your commute and, you know, get practiced up and be ready for turkey season. So now, the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to take it out so I'm not talking with it in, is I'm going to just blow some air over these reeds and make sure that this call is fitting in my mouth. And I'll show you what that looks like here. So all I did was just put that in and blow some air over the reeds and made sure that I wasn't getting an air leak. So if this call did not fit my palate properly, and I did that, you could hear some off sound, which would be air basically escaping around the sides of this and not going over the reeds the way you want them to. So then if that was the case, you try to trim it up where it was hitting and get it to fit just right. Now, once it's in, the first sound we're going to try to make is a yelp. And a diaphragm call, it's called that. We're pushing air up from our diaphragm and pushing it over this call. So don't think about blowing this call like you would blowing out candles of a birthday cake. You know, that's not how we do it. It's going to be more like if you were fogging a glass in front of you, breathing that air from deep down from your diaphragm. That's how we're going to push air over this call. And when you first put it in, even before you make a yelp, just start making noises. Get a feel for the call. It's a little musical instrument, and you're kind of learning how to play it. So. You know, get a feel for it, and then when you're ready to start making the yelp, I'm just basically saying, without saying it, but like yelp, 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 kind of making the sound in my mind like I think a turkey yelp sounds like, and then blowing that air over this call, and it makes that yelp. So now when you do that, you can, just like with the friction call, you can experiment with holding different parts of the striker and all that. With the diaphragm call, it's all going to be your mouth. So you can experiment with holding your mouth different ways, with dropping your jaw when you yelp. All these things are going to make the sound just a little bit different. So I'll make a few different yelps here and just try to make them sound a little bit different and find the ones that I like the best. And then that's generally how I'm gonna call until basically the turkey tells me that he likes something else better, and then I'll do that, because what he wants matters more than what I want. Anyway, here we go. Now we can get into some clucks, which again is just a more emphatic, think about it like a comeback call when you're thinking duck hunting. Your clucks are really getting on that bird, getting his attention, saying, hey, no, over here. So to make my clucks into here, kind of what I'm going to think about saying is putt, 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 putt. And really just pushing that air across these reeds pretty hard, and it sounds something like this. Now,
Curtis, can you explain what you're doing with your hand?
oh yeah, so mostly what I'm doing is making it so I don't look even more like a buffoon on the camera. But no, so what I'm really trying to do with my hand, I don't know if it does anything, but I like to throw Yelps off to one side and then the other. I don't know if it works, but it makes me feel better that at least I'm trying to make the call sound like it's not coming from my exact location. And then it also gives me a way to try to sound like multiple birds if I throw some calls over here and some calls over there. So I guess it's probably more for me than anything, but yeah, that's why I do it. Okay, so I'll get back into the, sorry, I don't have the chat up here, so if any questions come in, feel free to let me know. Yeah, so when we get the Clucks on here, a lot of people want to add in that purr and really just make it sound like real content birds. They're feeding, they're having a good time. You know, all the other turkeys should come and join the party. Now, for me, I do the purr on this a little bit different than some people. So some people can just, you know, kind of push the air over the reed and get a good purr. But with me, I actually roll my lips to help with the purr. So it kind of looks like that, but pushing air up from my diaphragm and mixing it in with the clucks. And so it sounds like this here. And so, yeah, that's a real good call. It sounds real romantic. It's not loud. It's not likely to alert anybody or scare any gobblers off. So if you're unsure where he is, maybe he's coming in, you know, maybe that's the call you switch to because you're still making sound. You're still hopefully keeping them excited, but you're not scaring them. Now, one more call I'll show on these. It's not really a spring call, but your diaphragm call is generally the best call to do like a Kiki run or when a big flock of turkeys scatters in the fall and they regroup. Their regroup call is also a variation of that Kiki call. So now doing it in here to make that high-pitched sound, I'm kind of going to say the word Kiki and then do a couple clucks after that. So here's what that sounds like. And in the fall, when I have busted up big groups of birds before, I just listen to exactly the sound that they make, and it's similar to that. And then I just try to make it back at them, and hopefully they regroup right around you. But so now I'll kind of, just like I did with the friction call, I'll kind of combine all of those calls into one little cadence that I might use when I'm hunting with my diaphragm call here. So. So there you have your diaphragm call. Not quite as versatile as the friction call or even the box call, and definitely not as user friendly. You do got to practice with these, and even throughout the year, like when I'm turkey hunting, I'm going to go ahead and when I'm driving to my spot, there's never a time when I don't have this diaphragm call in my mouth and I'm practicing while I'm in my car waiting to go out there, because it's the same if you played any music instrument. If you were a trumpet player or a guitar player about to go to a concert, you'd probably sit in the back and pick those strings a little bit before you go out on stage. And same thing with these calls. So take advantage when you're still in your vehicle. Get real comfortable. Make sure you got good surfaces on your calls. Make sure they're ready. Make sure you're singing good on your diaphragm call. And then when you leave your car and you actually start talking to the real birds and you're on that stage, you're going to feel confident, and hopefully you're going to have fun talking to those turkeys. So yeah, that's about all I got for diaphragm call. So I think with that, we're going to turn it over to Adam and talk about the box call.
Thanks, Curtis. Oh. There we go. Okay. Sorry, I didn't know if the camera was working. All right, so we're going to talk about box calls now. So I have a few to show you guys here. There's all sorts of different box calls out there. Some are more decorative pieces. Some people, handcraft them out of some special different kinds of woods and all that kind of stuff. So I have a couple that I will show you here that are a little bit more decorative. This is a super small one, and you can only make a call off the one side with it. I'll kind of go through all the ones I have. Here's another one. So these are kind of just ones that I have laying around. You can mess around and make some calls with them, but kind of ones I don't really want to take out into the woods. And then these two are my go-to that I take hunting with me. So kind of the two differences here. One, you have to apply chalk to on both sides. So I'll show you guys how to do that here in a second. And one already has a coating on it. This is called the Wet Box by Primos. So it's made for you to be able to use it in the rain or inclement weather, which is nice. So you don't have to worry about this washing off. It's kind of painted on there for you. So this is kind of what helps the friction of the two pieces of wood make the actual call. So that's kind of cool. So I'll show you guys how to take care of your calls. Right here I have just a stick of chalk. If you buy a box call, most of the time it'll come with a little piece of chalk in it already. So make sure you always have that in your vehicle at least, or in your bag, to prep your calls prior to getting out into the woods. So what you're going to want to do is on the paddle, this is the paddle of the call, you're going to want to basically just paint that, smear it on there pretty good, get a nice good coating on it. Just like that. And then on the actual box here on the lips of the call, you'll want to give those a few strokes of the chalk as well, just to get a nice even coating. And that way your call will be ready to make a nice crisp sound. So the few sounds I'm going to go over here, mainly what you're going to make with a box call are yelps, cuts, and then you can also do some purring. There's another kind of trick I'll show you guys later if you guys need to pull something out of your hat and do something in desperate measures. But most of the time those are your three main calls. And mainly when I use a box call is more of to locate turkeys. As Curtis said, all of these make great sounds, and you can kind of pick whatever one you like and are most comfortable with. I always have a box call with me, but I honestly haven't used it that many times in hunting situations. But I have it with me just in case. I keep a couple mouth calls, at least a slate call, and then one of these. So I have, at least one of each, just in case, I run into rain or I run into some sort of situation that I need to, use all all three of them perhaps in one day of hunting. So when I take the box call out generally is when I want to try to find a gobbler in the distance. So if I'm not having a lot of luck, I'll try to get up on top of a bigger ridge. And these tend to be pretty loud, and you're able to call on them pretty hard and crank that noise up, which obviously, sends it out further. So you're trying to elicit a response from a turkey further away. So it's perfect for that. I'll get up on top of a ridge, make sure that noise carries out pretty far, and try to pinpoint a turkey from there. So that's generally when I use a box call. Of course, if it's raining, this is nice, again, because this is the one that's coded. So if it's raining that day, or I know it's going to, chance of rain, I'll throw this one in my pack just in case if I want to use it or not. I have it just in case, so I don't get stranded out there without, a call that I'm able to use. So that's kind of generally when I use them. I'll move on to how to make the actual calls. So for a Yelp, it's pretty easy. You want to take the paddle of the call, and you're going to want to apply some pressure on the lip of the call, and you basically just want to slide it forward. So you want to do it a little bit shorter in the beginning and then a little quicker when you're at the end of the note. So that is your basic Yelp right there. So again, here I'll do it a little bit faster for you guys. There you go. So that is what a Yelp is. So moving on to the cut, there's a couple ways you can do it. I generally stick with this way, but I'll show you both. I like to put the paddle on the one lip of the box call there. I like to put my thumb on it about halfway, put a little bit of pressure, and then I'm able to tap the paddle of the box call right there. And that is what you call a cut, as Curtis, of course, explained with the mouth call and the pot call. So perfect, again, to make a Tom's head stick up, right in time for a shot, or elicit a gobble as well. So again, I'll show you guys this way. You can also take the paddle of the box call and kind of almost jerk it and smack it against the edge of the box call itself, and do it that way. So whichever way is easier for you guys and whichever way you're comfortable. So those are the two ways to do that. And then for a purr, what you want to do is the far edge of the box call. You're going to want to take it. The box call here, the paddle is on this little spring, so you can kind of rotate it. I like to get it as square as possible. Put it on that outer edge and slowly apply pressure and bring it towards me. Let me try to show you here better. So if I want to make a little bit of a sequence here, I could do some cuts, turn it into some yelps. So that's kind of your basic sequence there with a box call. Again, there's a lot of movement that goes into these. It's you gotta move pretty drastic movements with the paddle, and it's pretty loud usually, as I mentioned before as well. So it might not be the best call to use for close encounters, but again, Sometimes you get caught off guard, and that's what you have in your hand, and you just got to make do with what you got. Of course, you can make those purrs, try to make those quietly. Yeah, and of course, it's a versatile call. I definitely recommend at least getting one of these to, if anything, mess around with and practice with. But yeah, that's the basics of a box call. And the one last thing I will show you is a tip. I believe we have it later in the slides too. We'll cover it, but I always keep a headband or just a rubber tie here. I like to put that over the box call. And I also usually carry a jersey glove between the paddle and the box call itself, so that when you're, running through the woods or getting to your spot, you gotta, pick up the pace a little bit. This isn't just making a bunch of noise in your pockets. So I like to keep that. Also, what this is handy for is if you don't have a locator call,
Headphone warning.
quickly fabricate a little gobble call here out of the box call. So if you put that head tie there and just shake the box call, it turns into a makeshift gobbler right there. So neat little trick that I learned from a good friend. So keep that in mind just in case if you get in a tight spot. And yeah, I believe
Thanks,
we're
Adam.
throwing it back to Dan.
Yeah, perfect. And just one more thing I would add about the box calls is when I first started turkey hunting, and you guys will pick this up the more you're out there, turkey hunting is very active. It's not like deer hunting where you're confined to one space for typically the afternoon or the morning. Turkey hunting, you're putting on a 30-minute hunt. Maybe that bird doesn't come in, then it's time to go find another one. So I will caution you, kind of like Adam mentioned, the hair tie is a great way to minimize kind of unwanted noise as you're moving around. But another really important thing that I realized is a lot of the turkey vests that you see on the market these days have kind of a built-in seat that you can just like quickly, throw against a tree. And a lot of times they have kind of a big space in the back to just kind of throw your calls as you're kind of, needing to get your hands free. Box calls are very fragile. And so just make sure, I've broken several over the years just having them in my backpack, and I have to quickly hunker down and get next to a tree, and next thing you know, your box call's in a bunch of pieces. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're out there. Now, the last type of call we're going to discuss before we get into some of the strategic aspects of things is locator calls. And these calls are, again, used to elicit a gobble from a roosted bird, a roosted tom. And so obviously with turkey hunting during the spring, the legal game is males. Now there are instances where you can harvest a bearded hen. That is fairly rare to happen out in nature. I believe it's less than 0.05% of hens actually have a beard. So typically you're going to be, again, focusing on the tom, which is an adult male, or a jake, which is an immature male. And so they have this really unique tendency to basically shock gobble. And you can kind of think of it as if you're kind of walking around the woods and you hear a loud noise and you kind of get startled. And oftentimes you may let out a gasp or kind of a short scream, or in my case, maybe a girly scream. So that's kind of the same thing that's happening here. And so the whole idea of a locator gobble is to just cause this kind of innate response out of a male bird that he cannot control, and he's just going to immediately gobble and give away his location. And so there's a couple different calls you can use. Some of the more popular are going to be an owl call. My personal favorite is a crow call, and it's kind of what you see here pictured in the top right. I like the crow call because you're just blowing air through it. There's really no learning curve. You don't have to think about it. It just kind of sounds like a caw as you blow through it. You can also use a duck call, truck door, car horn, or even Bigfoot knocks if you're a Bigfoot believer. But essentially it's just a loud noise that causes that gobbling response out of a male without him even thinking about it. And so my personal favorite, again, is a crow call. It's easy to use. It carries over a wide distance. But you can also just yelp or use a cackling sequence or some of the other calls that we mentioned. But now we're going to kind of put this all into play. So we're going to go over a hunting scenario, and I'll give you kind of my perspective on how I typically go about utilizing these different vocalization types during kind of your typical turkey hunt. And so in Illinois, the legal shooting hours for turkey are 30 minutes before sunrise to 1 o'clock p.m. And so we're really not focused on that afternoon hunt in Illinois. Some states do allow you to hunt in the evenings and afternoons. Illinois does not. And there's, again, a lot of other states that don't either. And the whole idea for that is to allow the birds to have an evening to be able to get back up on their roost safely. Because a turkey that's on the ground at dark does not have the ability to fly back up to the roost. And so that leaves them to predation, as well as inclement weather if it's wet and rainy, so they can get hypothermia. And so there's a lot of reasons that it's important to let these birds, excuse me, get up to the roost. And that's another really important thing to bring up now is if these birds are roosted, we as hunters don't want to push them out of the roost. We want to allow them to roost during the night. And again, obviously that's for the health of the individual bird. But also there's some selfishness there. The whole point of locating and finding these roosts is so that when I show up in the morning, I know exactly where that bird's going to be in the morning. And so you want to maintain a substantial amount of distance between yourself and the roost as you're trying to locate the roost, so that you don't accidentally push these birds off the roost. And so typically you're going to be doing this 30 minutes before sunset. To about 15 to 20 minutes after official sunset, so you don't have a lot of time. You may have 15 to 20 minutes of real active gobbling off the roost in the evening. But I'm just going to go out to a location that I have obviously a permit for, and I'm just going to start calling. Typically, I'm going to arrive about an hour before sunset just to allow me to get back in the piece of public land that I'm hunting. When I get there, I might slam my car door, just see if that triggers any random gobbling. And then once I start getting out to where I think birds are going to be roosted, I'll start letting out my locator sequences. They're going to be very short, and they're going to be fairly brief. And you want to mark where these roosts are as good as you can, whether it's using a GPS or a map or just kind of even mentally. Now, one of the big challenges, especially after you locate a roost, is trying to anticipate where you expect the birds to fly down. That is often the hardest part of hunting adjacent or hunting near a roost, is trying to anticipate where they fly down. Now, if you were lucky enough to be able to hear or see them go from the ground up to their roost tree, chances are they're going to use that kind of same path in the morning. That's fairly common, is for them to use that same path. We had a good question from Nate. What sort of distance are we talking about? If you hear a far off gobbler while roosting a turkey, are we talking 400 yards, 1 mile? Great question, and I should have brought that up. I'll go forward to a slide really quick, and then we'll kind of come back to it. So here's kind of an example of where I located birds, not last year, but the year prior, since we couldn't hunt on public ground last year. And so in this case, if you can see my cursor, I was somewhere in here, and it's not necessarily a distance thing. Obviously distance is important, but what I'm more focused on avoiding is a direct line of sight between that bird and that where I anticipate that bird to be and myself. So honestly, when you're out, looking for roost, you're going to hear them gobbling off, like you said, 400 yards away, 500 yards away. If you need to get closer, I typically, when I'm roosting birds, I do not like to get any closer than 100 yards. That's kind of my personal max. Any closer than that, they're going to start picking up on you again. They have incredible eyesight. They're really good at seeing any kind of minimal movement. So I want to have some kind of geographic terrain or topographic feature that obstructs the line of sight between that bird and myself. And so it's not necessarily always just trying to stay a certain distance. It's just trying to stay concealed so they cannot necessarily see me. But again, it can be challenging because you want to try to pinpoint, exactly where those birds are. So there's kind of a fine balance there, and you'll start to pick that up the more you're out there and actively searching for these roosts. But if you can get within 150 yards of a roost, that's a really good spot to be in, because at that point you can get a pretty good idea of where those birds are actually roosting. So I wouldn't go much closer than that. There are some people, if you watch the hunting shows on TV or YouTube, they're sometimes hunting directly underneath the tree that the birds are roosted in. You don't really need to do that, and oftentimes that just causes more issues than it can be a benefit. So I typically, personally, I want to set my decoys in my location about 100 to 150 yards away from the roost. So again, kind of moving back to how do we anticipate where these birds are going to come down. Obviously, if you saw them go up, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to follow that same path. Now, if their turkeys are oftentimes roosted on ridges, they are usually going to fly down to the high side of that terrain. And so if we go back to this specific image here, I can tell by looking at these topographic lines that this is kind of the high point of this specific area. So this darker contour line is kind of the high point, and it drops off to the east, and it kind of maintains that same elevation on the west. And so that gives me a pretty good indication that that bird is not going to want to fly through all this, timber and then fly down into a lower lying area. It's much more conducive and easy for them to just quickly hop out onto this high terrain that's nice and open. And so those are the kind of the things that I'm trying to look for, is what does the terrain tell me? They don't particularly like to fly and go through very thick cover. We talked about it a little bit earlier, that birds have the propensity to hang up, especially toms. It can be fences, it can be creeks, it can be roads, it can be thick brush. I've even seen them not walk across a field because it had a mowed strip through it that looked different from the rest of the field. And so these are kind of the things that will impact where a bird is going to leave a roost. And so as I'm looking at a site, I want to try to identify where are the fences and creeks and these other physical obstructions that a bird might hang up on, because that's not only going to tell me where he's likely to leave the roost, but also I can set myself in a position that there's not a creek between me and him, or a road between me and him, and that he has a nice conducive path to head towards my direction. So again, utilizing these topographic features and cover to conceal your approach. Now, typically when I'm going out in the morning, I want to be set up about 30 minutes before light begins to appear on the horizon. I'm not going to use flashlights. I'm not going to try to make a bunch of noise. I'm going to go at a slow, steady pace, and I might even take some breaks. And this kind of has a unique reason. I kind of said that weird, but I try to personally sound like another animal when I'm out there walking around. Turkeys are used to having raccoons and deer and coyotes and bobcats and squirrels and rabbits all walking underneath them. That doesn't disturb them. They're used to, obviously things move around in nature. They're used to these sounds. It's the sounds that wood clanking or metal clanking, these things that are not typically heard in the woods. And so when I'm out there heading to a roost, I'm not going to use a flashlight. I'm going to walk at kind of a slow and steady pace and just try to sound as natural as possible. You don't need to be quiet. You just need to sound like you fit into that area. So maybe try to sound like a deer walking through. Again, you don't want to get too close to that roost in the morning. I typically will be about 100 to 150 yards away. Is kind of my ideal setup. That gives the birds space to be able to fly down, but it also gives me a little bit of cover, so I'm not right on top of those birds the second they fly off the roost. It allows me to, again, build my vocalization scenario, build my whole setup, and make it look like it's inviting and looks natural. And so in this specific case, you can see there's kind of two parking lots where I roosted this bird, and this is where I think looking at satellite imagery and topographic maps can be so vitally important for any hunter, and particularly public land hunters, because you have oftentimes multiple points of access to a specific piece of ground. And being able to look at these maps can give you a really good indication of A, the easiest way to get to an area, and B, the easiest, the quietest, the stealthiest approach that you can have. And so in this specific example, you can see we kind of roosted this bird right here on top of this ridge, right, kind of overlooking this old abandoned field. But what I did not realize the first time I hunted this area was there was another roost up in this area. And unfortunately, I did not hear those birds calling from the roost when I located this original bird that I was targeting. And that can be challenging and can cause some issues. Now, not every time is a bird going to respond on the roost. very oftentimes toms will go silent. They'll just stop talking and stop communicating. And that's kind of what happened in this specific area. And so I was, just kind of meandering my way. I knew I had a ways to go before the birds could see me. And I hit this corner and I happened to bust up an entire flock of birds. That caused this roost to then flush, and it just kind of caused an entire meltdown of the hunt, so to speak. But I say that to say that just because you located a bird, that's not the only bird in the area. Chances are there's going to be hen roosts, and I think that might have been what was over in this area, was that it was a hen roost. And of course, they're not going to respond to kind of the shot gobble that we're trying to elicit out of the toms, and so that's likely what happened. And so those are some of the things you need to think about as you're kind of approaching your setup. And had I been a little bit more cautious, I probably could have walked along this fence row, because I know there's not any big trees that are suitable for turkeys roosted. And so those are the areas that I'm kind of focusing on as I'm heading to hunt that specific roost. I'm trying to walk areas that are either A, they don't have a conducive, timber stand for roosts, or B, maybe it's a road and there's just, constant traffic and things that the birds aren't going to roost there. So had I come from the kind of southern direction in this case, I would have been a lot more likely to have a successful hunt. So after you kind of choose your route, you want to, again, approximately about 100 yards from that roost, and go ahead and set up your decoys, depending on kind of the seasonality of your hunt and what's going on with the birds at that moment. Obviously, in Illinois, we kind of have a unique season that it's kind of 5 individual segments. And typically, if you're hunting public land, primarily, you're going to get one of those segments, right? And so depending on the exact segment you get, that's going to impact how I'm setting up decoys as well as how I'm calling. And so if I have a very, very early hunt, so maybe first segment or maybe even the start of the second segment, I'm not going to try a fighting setup or a breeding setup. I might focus on just kind of a feeding setup. So I typically will just start out with 2 hen decoys kind of in the field, just like you see this one here. And I might have a Jake decoy following, maybe 5 to 10 yards behind them, kind of looking like it's pursuing these 2 hens. And that's really important. And I use the word Jake there for a very specific reason. I know when I first started turkey hunting, everyone's all use tom decoys, use, the biggest, the most mature decoys out there. And that can be effective depending on your specific motivation for turkey hunting. If you want to try to harvest a fairly mature and old bird, then sure, a tom decoy is what you're looking for. But if you're just trying to get a legal bird that you can harvest, I recommend utilizing a Jake decoy. And it kind of makes sense because, if you think about it, if there's this big, mean, old, mature tom that probably kicked, every other male's butt in the past few weeks is out there with hens, a young bird is not going to come in. He's already intimidated. He knows that he's not mature enough and he will lose a fight with that other male. And so very often they're just not even going to come in. And so I like to use a Jake decoy because, again, it'll get those younger birds. They're still going to feel comfortable, but it also still bring in the toms because they're going to come in regardless. But again, it allows you to still bring in those younger birds without being too intimidating. And so I really like to focus on this. Again, my first hunt is going to be a feeding setup with 2, maybe 1 or 2 hens, and then a Jake decoy kind of in pursuit, 5 to 10 yards behind those 2 hen decoys. And always, always, always make sure to position your decoys beyond your location. And so this is kind of the same example we were just discussing. And this happened to be on the 3rd day of my hunt at this specific site. They went back and utilized this same roost the next few days. And this was kind of my setup. And so you see we have a nice, good open field. Those birds can land nice and clean. And they have space to kind of roam around. They have natural feeding areas there. And pay attention to where I put these decoys. If I were to have these decoys to kind of my northeast or between me and this roost, very commonly those birds are going to hang up 20 to maybe 30 yards past your decoys. They're just going to sit there and watch. That tom, he may be gobbling his head off. Every time you make a note, he's going to gobble. Every time you make a note, he gobbles, but he's just going back and forth and back and forth. And he's not committing to that final distance that he needs to close to get within range. but having the decoys beyond you, he will still kind of come in. And if he happens to hang up 20 to 30 yards beyond your decoys, well, that puts him kind of right in your sweet spot. And so this is kind of how I like to go about setting up my decoys, is put them just beyond my location so that that bird, again, if he hangs up, he's in range. But it also does another really crucial thing is Curtis kind of mentioned it with the way you can kind of throw some of your vocalizations to make it sound like it's coming from maybe a different direction. Turkeys are very good at picking up where sound is coming from. And so in a scenario like this, you can try to throw that sound off to your left a little bit. But what it's going to do is his eyes the entire time are going to be focused on these hens. He's not even going to see you sitting over here. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility and also reassurance that he's just going to be focused on these decoys the entire time. Now, in the morning when it first starts to get sunlight, again, don't call. You don't want to be the first bird that's kind of talking in the woods. I like to let the woods kind of wake up on their own. You'll start to hear distant gobbles, from a mile to 2 miles away. Then it'll slowly start to sound like they're getting closer and closer and closer. And then every bird that's within your earshot will start to fire off and just be gobbling and gobbling and gobbling. And that's when I'm going to start, doing a little bit of calling. At this stage in the day, I'm not going to be yelping very much. I'm not going to be purring. I'm just going to be kind of clucking, just kind of, again, mimicking what I hear those natural hens doing. A lot of times these hens at this point in the day are still going to be in their roost. And so they're just going to be kind of soft yelping. Occasionally they'll do some clucks, maybe a cut. Once I hear that fly down cackle, that's when it's kind of time to go. And that's when things start getting really exciting, is when you hear that first bird hit the ground. Now, when I hear the first bird hit the ground, you have a couple different options. You can either try to mimic another roost flying down. I don't find that to be too effective because, again, that tom chose that location for a very good reason. And it's typically because he knows there's a hen roost nearby and he already knows where they're at. And so his first duty or his first task after he gets off the roost in the morning, he's going to go find that hen roost that he identified the night before. And so you can try to make it seem like there was another roost that maybe he didn't notice. Or what I like to do is just try to make it sound like those hens have already left the roost, and I'm just going to start doing some soft yelps and just try to entice him a little bit more. Now, I will say, pay attention to how the birds are reacting to the calls. If that tom gobbles at everything you do, you're in a pretty good spot. There's a fairly high chance that you have his interest and that you can continue slowly bringing him in. But what I try to mimic is the hens. The hens are going to tell you everything because, again, in nature, that tom is trying to bring the hens to him. And in hunting, we're trying to do the reverse. So I'm doing exactly what those hens are doing, and I'm going to try to mimic that to kind of the best of my ability. I didn't mean to move forward there. So again, I'm just going to do some soft yelps, try to get his attention. And what happens more often than not on this kind of early roost style hunt, you'll know whether or not you're in the action within kind of the first 30 to 45 minutes of the day. If that tom flies off the roost and you never hear from him again, chances are he found those live hens that he was looking at the night before, and he's off trying to actively breed them. The next scenario is that you never hear a bird all morning. And chances are what that means is that you got a little bit too close to the roost, and maybe you flushed them out of the roost and didn't hear it. Or sometimes they may not leave a roost, but they know that you're in the area. It may just cause them to leave in the other direction and kind of fly off in the other direction, and you'll never even know it. But what I will say is my most successful turkey hunts have been between 10 and about 11:30. Everybody really focuses on this kind of roost hunt, and for obvious reasons. It can be very effective. It can be a lot of fun. It's awesome way to just kind of see the spring morning wake up. But again, a lot of times these birds have live hens that they're already checking out or interested in, and it's very difficult to pull a tom away from a live hen and bring them to your plastic hens. So you have a few different options there. You can try to mimic the hen and bring the hen to you, or you can just kind of relax, let them go about their business for an hour or two. Maybe you go off in another section and try to locate another tom to start hunting. but that kind of 10 to 11:30 is when I find a lot of the magic really starts to happen. The early morning roost has already gone. He has already either bred or kind of visited with that local hen group that he's been following around. And very often that's when you'll start to see the toms and the jakes start to expand their range a little bit. They'll start moving around on the ground a little bit more in search of new hens. And so that kind of midday can be very effective. And what you'll see a lot is a lot of hunters, they'll hunt the roost and they're out of the woods by 9 o'clock. I've seen that very commonly on pieces of public land. And so the later in the morning you get, a lot of times you have so much land at your disposal. And that's when, like Adam mentioned, that's when I like to pull out my box call. I'll go hit maybe a high ridge and strike that yelp as loud, as crisp and clear as I can, and just see if I hear any other toms start to fire off and respond to that yelp. And then when they do, that's when I try to start to close the distance. I may move, 100 to 200 yards at a time. I'm going to stop. I'll start calling again to see if he's closing the distance as well. Try to get kind of a new location on where he's at, and just kind of play this chess match of trying to close the distance between you and him. And once you get to a point where you think you're within 100 to 150 yards, that's when I'm going to set up my decoys, and I'm going to start doing a fairly in-depth calling sequence to try to get him to come in. Now, a few other tips that I'd like to highlight before we close out today. Do not overcall. It's very easy to do. I know when I first started turkey hunting, I loved calling. It's one of the coolest parts of turkey hunting, but you can overdo it. There's instances where calling more is effective. There are instances where being totally silent is effective. And it's one of those that you'll start to pick up on the more you turkey hunt. And again, I wish there was a real cut and dry answer, but a lot of it is just how that bird is reacting to your calls. If you're yelping and he gobbles every time that you're yelping, I'm not going to change up my scenario. If he's yelping or if he's gobbling and responding, chances are that's working for him. Now, if he's not closing the distance at all, then I'm going to start to try different things. I might try to purr or to cut, and just again try some of these more erratic calls to see if it'll pull him in. And if he doesn't, that's when I will go silent. I'll sit there for 5 or 10 minutes. I won't make a noise, and I'll just try to see what his next move is. And then after a few minutes, I might try to yelp and see if I can get him to gobble again and see where he's at. So don't overcall. Also, don't forget your sandpaper or scratch pad. Like Curtis and Adam both mentioned, they're very important to keeping the tonality of your call, but also ensuring that the call makes the correct noises. Like Adam mentioned, keeping a rubber band or glove around your box call can prevent it from, these accidental noises as the paddle is kind of slapping around in your bag. And when a bird is close, let your decoys do the work. That's how I kind of like to turkey hunt. That's how I waterfowl hunt too. When I'm using calls, what I'm trying to do is get their attention to get them to look at my decoys. Once I get their attention and they start to look at my decoys, oftentimes I'm going to put the call away and just kind of be silent. Now, I might do some purrs and some soft yelps to keep them engaged a little bit, but I'm certainly not going to do a loud yelping sequence. I'm not going to cackle. I'm not going to cut. I might just do some kind of clucks and purrs, just again keep that scene looking as realistic as possible. And again, that comes with experience. When you're out there and you see hens, even if you're deer hunting and you happen to see turkeys, I implore you to watch them. Spend the time, just pull out your binoculars and just watch and listen to how they move, how they just kind of putt and cluck and purr as they're just kind of going about their daily life. Because everything we're trying to do is add to the realism of the scenario that we're creating in the hopes that they commit. And again, that's how you can start to learn the body language of birds, is just by watching as many birds as you can. Another really important tip is you're not always going to hear a tom responding to your calls. I've been on several hunts the past few years where I have a tom that I'm actively working. It sounds like he's 75 to 100 yards just kind of on the other side of a knoll, and it sounds like he's fired up and ready to come in. And then all of a sudden I hear the sound of a footstep behind me. And that's very common, is that what I like to call them silent toms. They just kind of sneak in behind you. They don't ever gobble. They don't ever, strut. They just kind of come in nice and slow, and they're just going to appear. So just because you're not hearing gobbles doesn't mean toms aren't in the area and that they're not responding to you. It just may be for whatever reason they're not vocal that day. So don't forget that birds can certainly sneak up on you. Now we're kind of in our wrap up stage, and one thing we always like to highlight is obviously some of the partners that we have with the Illinois Learn to Hunt program. And one of our biggest is the National Wild Turkey Federation, and their motto is basically, it's simple and it's beautiful. It's save the habitat, save the hunt. And so they do a lot of really good habitat work as well as outreach events to get more people involved in turkey hunting. And just kind of as a caveat, for instance, in the early 1900s, there was not a single turkey in the state of Illinois. I mean, that's mind-blowing, thinking there was not a single turkey in this state. But through these substantial conservation efforts by NWTF, by Illinois DNR, by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and by all these different organizations and agencies, now we have this huge, robust population that's well over 100,000 birds, where 120 years ago we didn't have a single one. And so they do a lot of really great work to manage habitat for turkeys as well as for other species. And it's a great way to kind of give back to conservation, but also to meet like-minded hunters. So if you're a new hunter, these local organizations are a great way to start building relationships with hunters, with landowners, and just kind of meet like-minded people. So they have many local chapters across the state. Here's kind of their website information. We will, again, in our follow-up email that you get tomorrow, we'll send out these links as well. And they also have kind of their big National Wild Turkey Federation virtual convention and sports show. It starts on February 15th. Now, historically, these are in-person events that I like to describe them as kind of like a rock concert. I mean, I went to one, I think it was 2 years ago, that I think there was over 30,000 people from across the country, all in one spot, dedicated to talking about turkey hunting, turkey conservation, turkey habitat. And it's just a great way to, again, meet like-minded people, give back to conservation efforts, and also get some really cool products and maybe some win a firearm or two. So another big initiative they have going on right now is they are doing a kind of a variety of fundraisers. Now, typically NWTF has local chapter, banquets that they have kind of a big meal, and everybody comes together and hangs out for an evening filled with, raffles and auctions and these things. But obviously with the current COVID restrictions and pandemic, they have shifted a lot of these efforts to be online. So these are a few of the examples of some of the different products that you can win through the NWTF and some of their offerings. And again, we'll pass all this information in that reminder email. A few upcoming webinars that we have that I'd like to highlight. We have a Turkey Hunting 101 webinar on February 16th, and then a Turkey Hunting 102 on February 18th. And those are designed to kind of go in tandem. So 101 is really going to focus on kind of the ecology of turkeys, as well as the rules and regulations and some of the basics of turkey hunting in terms of equipment and things like this. And then Turkey 102, this is arguably one of my favorite webinars that we've designed and given. It's very situational based. And so we'll go over, 6 or 7 different turkey hunting scenarios that we've been in. And we'll discuss our strategies for how we adapted and how we planned and kind of went through the hunt. If you're interested in shed hunting, we have a shed hunting overview and tactics webinar on February 23rd, where we're going to discuss antlers and shed hunting and some of the regulations that apply there. But we're really going to do a deep dive into kind of buck bedding habitat, as well as kind of buck feeding areas that they're likely to be in this year or this time of year. And so that can hopefully help you find some of those sheds if you're interested in that. We'll also have a turkey hunting Q&A session that we're going to host on February 25th at 7. And that's going to be just kind of a fairly unorganized webinar. We're just going to, kind of pop on here and allow people to ask questions about the upcoming turkey season, turkey regulations, strategy, culling. So we'll just kind of be here for you. So if you have any questions that you think of, that's a great day to kind of come out, hang out, spend the evening with us and maybe learn something. And then on March 2nd, we also have a shotgun overview. And so we're going to be discussing some of the different, shotgun action types, some basic maintenance and care. But we're really going to do it from kind of a hunter's perspective and a hunter in Illinois' perspective. As we all know, firearm regulations in Illinois are a lot stricter than in other states. We can't use rifles and things for some species. And so we're going to do a real deep dive into shotguns and try to paint it in a picture that, hey, if you're looking to hunt deer, maybe this is the one that you're interested in taking. Here are our social media channels. If you're new to the Illinois Learn to Hunt program, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And we've been recording a lot of videos here in the past few weeks that'll be starting to add to our YouTube channel. There's a lot of really good videos on there already, but be on the lookout for more coming soon. And if you're new to the Learn to Hunt program, historically we are kind of a field-based workshop program where we try to do the hands-on activities and mentor hunts and show how to process and butcher. Obviously with COVID restrictions, we've been kind of relegated to doing these virtual. So if you are new to the Learn to Hunt program, if you follow us on our social media channels or our newsletter, once we get the go ahead to resume some of these in-person activities, you can look out for these. They're a lot of fun. And I still learn a lot. We bring in volunteers and different mentors from other organizations, and everybody's got a different way of doing things. And that's the really cool aspect about kind of these in-person events, is you get to see all these different techniques and kind of choose what works best for you. But with that, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We do have we're kind of over time, but I'll stay around for a few minutes and answer questions. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. If not, thank you for joining us tonight, and be on the lookout for an email tomorrow with a recording of this webinar, some other handouts, and then a survey to just get your feedback, so you can let us know what you kind of liked about this presentation, what you didn't, and maybe what other types of content are you interested in. So we have a question from Antonio. Antonio asks, why doesn't Illinois have late hunting? That's a great question, and it again, I'll kind of reiterate, I am not a DNR employee. I work for the University of Illinois, so I'm not speaking on behalf of DNR, just to kind of clarify that. But a lot of the reasons that states don't allow kind of afternoon turkey hunting is because turkeys need to be able to get up on the roost. And if they're disturbed prior to being able to safely get up on the roost, it opens them up to predation, as well as some inclement weather issues that arise from early morning dew and wet, because they don't really have the ability to fly up into that roost once it's dark. And so allowing them to have the afternoon to resume their normal breeding behavior, their normal feeding behavior, and allowing them to get up to the roost safe, is extremely important. And it's also really important to allow the birds to do some natural breeding and just natural breeding that if hunting is occurring all day, they may not have that option to. And so it's really important to give them kind of a period of the day that they can relax, go about their normal daily activities, reproduce, lay eggs, nest, and all that stuff without causing issues. We have a question from Nate. Have any of you tried bow hunting spring turkey? I have been successful at drawing back. I have yet to release an arrow. It seems like every time I get one within range, and every time I draw back, something goes wrong, and they happen to catch me out of the corner of their eye. So archery is one of those things that's a lot of fun for turkey hunting, but it's very difficult. I have shot I guess 2 turkeys with archery equipment during the fall from a tree stand, and that seemed to work a lot better for me, because they're not looking up in the tree for somebody drawing a bow. So it certainly can be done, but it takes a little bit more planning and a lot more practice to make sure you're proficient with your equipment, but also to make sure that you can successfully draw that bow back. Now, I will say, if you're truly interested in trying bow hunting in the spring turkey season, if it's something you're really passionate about, what I would recommend is tuning your bow a little bit differently than you might for deer. So I shot competitive archery during college, and one thing that I picked up on rather quickly is some of the best archers that I've ever met or ever seen, they're shooting 30 to 40 pounds. Obviously my deer bow I have cranked up to, I think it's about 65 pounds right now. Now, if I were to go out spring turkey hunting, I'm probably going to dial that back to 40 to 45. It allows you to have a much easier draw because again, you're not struggling to draw back all that weight, but it's also going to be a lot easier for you to hold it back. With a lot less draw weight. And obviously with turkey, they're not as big as deer, so we don't need a ton of penetration power and energy behind that arrow. So that's kind of my school of thought. I know not everybody's going to agree with that. Because again, once you get back to deer season, you'll kind of have to readjust it and re-sight it in. But I have found I'm a much more effective archer if I tone down my draw weight just a little bit. Well, I think that wraps up tonight's webinar. Apologies for going over a little bit on time, but I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. And again, just be looking out for that email tomorrow that'll again contain some of the links and products that we highlighted today. And again, we'll have a survey, so please take that survey. So that we can continue to refine these webinars for you guys. Because again, we're here to serve you. So if you have any questions at any point, feel free to reach out through Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, email, and just let us know. But with that, thanks for joining us and have a wonderful evening.